Squid Game, sci-fi masterpiece, overhyped, or accurate portrayal and allegory for the modern world? I finally got round to watching it. Here's what I think. Sorry for not watching Squid Games earlier. I've got children. Now, if you haven't watched Squid Game, there probably will be spoilers as I analyse the show, so please don't watch it. And also don't watch it if you're sick of thinking about Squid Game because you watched it about a month ago and can't be bothered to hear about it anymore. But the reason that I want to talk to you about it is, of course, it touches on many themes that we talk about regularly on our channel, where, in essence, the poor are forced to compete in a life and death contest while elites chuckle in golden twinkly masks. The golden twinkly mask, of course, is only in Squid Game. But masked capitalism, the idea that everyone's participating in a fair competition when really there are various ghettos and enclaves that don't permit real, fair, honest competition. I really enjoyed the show. I thought the last two episodes were a bit mad, especially one of them people wearing a gold mask who was doing his acting like this. I'd like to do a 69 at you in your eye hole. He really annoyed me. But other than him, I thought everyone was pretty good. Basically, it was better when they were speaking Korean. That was one of the things I take home from it, and I certainly didn't like it when the protagonist dyed his hairhead. Other than that, though, I've got a lot of interesting cultural analysis to offer you. Some of it is based on this article written by Caitlin Clark. Squid Game is an allegory of capitalist hell. Now, of course, this is obviously relevant to a wide variety of global audiences because it's become a phenomenon that has encompassed the globe. Thinking about my personal reaction, I was struck by the imagery, the sort of alienness of it, like it's not the same kind of aesthetic as I'm used to as a consumer of mostly Western content, though I do watch sometimes them Korean action movies and stuff. I mean, in particular, the labyrinth and the sort of lurid colours of that, the sort of gory beauty of some of the games and some of the icons of some of the games. But like, I suppose what at heart makes the show interesting is its willingness to confront the idea, and like surely its popularity is in large part due to this, that we're living in a very brutal world where ordinary people are forced to operate within the confines of a kind of game. Because what is the free market other than a game? What is the idea of a nation other than a game? These games increasingly, and I thought this became apparent in the scenes where you would see them inside the game and then outside of the game, you know, when they go home for a little bit, like after episode 1, that's where it became clear to me that all of life is a kind of a game. The protagonist being someone that's interested in gambling and betting and playing on that thing, you know what I mean by that thing, right? I tried to apply it to my own life, even like, you know, relationships can feel like a game sometimes with their give and take and compromise. So I think that as an allegory, it stands up, and what it does well, as any populist art form must, is amplify the ideas it's talking about to a height of drama where it's worth watching.
저 상금이 대충 얼마나 되나요?
It obviously has particular relevance in the country of its origin, and I thought I'd like to know a little bit more about South Korea. You know, I've not done a bloody degree on it, but I have read this thing. Have a listen. The South Korean economy has experienced tremendous change in the last 60 years after undergoing rapid industrialization in the aftermath of the Korean War. In 1960, South Korea's per capita income of $82 placed it behind a long list of economically exploited and impoverished countries, including Ghana, Senegal, Zambia, and Honduras. It weren't until dictator Park Chung-hee came to power in 61 that Korea began to experience tremendous economic growth. Known as the Miracle on the River Han, South Korea developed from a low-income country to one of the leading economies in the world in the span of a few decades. It's interesting the amount of cultural imports. I'm too old really to know, but I know that band everyone's well into are Korean, and like loads of terminology, mukbang, like Korean culture and Anglophonic cultures or Western cultures are merging in a novel and interesting way. And this is obviously the pinnacle to date of that experience, and I suppose a consequence of ongoing globalization. And this idea of globalism is in fact one of the themes really that there is, as represented in the defining motif of the show, an elite triangle at the very top, a governing class of professionals that maintain the myths and narratives of the dominator culture, the morass and melee of poverty with excruciating desperation as an underclass. I feel like that kind of is what that grid looks like that they indeed play their eponymous titular Squid Game on. Though economic growth in Korea raised the overall standard of living, many have been left behind. South Korea's suicide rate is one of the highest in the world, a problem particularly among the elderly, nearly half of whom live below the poverty line. Young people have their own struggles, including military conscription, intensifying academic pressure, and staggering unemployment. As of 2020, the youth employment rate was 22%. I liked the way that it represented the various strata of Korean culture. Only one immigrant, I guess, I don't know, but based on my knowledge, which is gleaned from Squid Game, a somewhat homogenous culture, it seems. It was interesting to see them all live and vie together. One thing though, you know, when you find out, and here is the main spoiler, that number one is in fact the master of the entire Squid Game, I feel like my wife said she wanted to see him spin around in a chair and take a mask off. So, like, you know, some of us really crave cliche. Seeing him there dying in that bed, I didn't feel like it fully paid off for me. I wanted to hear why he did it, what it was about. I mean, other than I really liked playing those games as a child. If you read this brilliant article, link in the description, that David Foster Wallace wrote in Harper's about going on luxury cruises, he explains how luxury and the pursuit of pleasure is a futile endeavour because the idea of luxury, all of your needs are met and fulfilled, leads you to a kind of place of nihilism. And indeed, nihilism, of course, is a key idea that's explored in Squid Game. The idea that human life is meaningless and you might as well just toy around, mess around. Without ethics, morals, reason and purpose, life becomes kind of empty and unbearable. And though that's not reason enough to deny truth, if you believe the truth is an atheistic purposelessness expansion into an ongoing abyss, it is a pretty good way of constructing meaningful relationships, groups and cultures. It is a reason to be kind and compassionate. And the moments of kindness and compassion in Squid Game, where one player helps another, where they form teams, where they stand up for one another, where there are the two dominant groups, one which is sort of founded on compassion and friendship, another that is founded on brutality. That's an interesting way of seeing how working class culture responds to oppression, that great values can emerge in spaces of oppression. We see it all the time. We again and again see that when people are in situations of crisis, they don't go looting and go crazy. They help one another. Of course, there is some looting because, in a sense, you could say, well, how did the wealthy and the powerful acquire their resources? In many cases, certainly historically, it is through plunder. While perhaps universal in capitalist societies, the ideal of meritocracy has particular resonances in Korean culture dating back to Confucianism. The idea that hard work will pay off remains a common slogan in Korea, even as more and more young Koreans who followed the straight and narrow path of the highly competitive Korean education system are met with unemployment, chaebol domination and inequality. Like Parasite before it, Squid Game shows that cracks are forming in the country's capitalist mythos, and the global success of Squid Game demonstrates that it is more than a Korean phenomenon. It's something that we all are beginning to recognise. More and more people are turning to independent media. People are questioning the stories and narratives that we're continually fed, particularly transcendent narratives like hard work pays off. Of course, it's interesting and important and sometimes beneficial to be devout and to be purposeful, but the idea that you can somehow become Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk is, like, in a way, a pointless and ridiculous idea, because huge financial success and domination like that is dependent and necessarily requires huge amounts of poverty and glaring inequality. To ignore that is like willfully entering into an illusion. My overall impression of Squid Game is it tells a very interesting story that is highly relevant right now, which brings together themes of brutality, nihilism, meaningless entertainment culture, our willingness to consume glittery banality in exchange for real joy, real purpose, exchange pleasure for meaning and connection, the idea that we can fulfill ourselves entirely through the acquisition of something external, that there is some dangling piggy bank at the end of the rainbow. The fact that the protagonist ends up a kind of hardened lone desperado figure, I find very, very interesting. Even though the show ends setting up potential secondary series and seasons, for me, it is a beautifully self-contained piece of cultural analysis, a wonderful piece of entertainment, and a chilling window into the reality of many people's lives. A lot of ordinary people are competing in a kind of constructed game. One or two people might make it. In fact, as a successful entertainer from an ordinary background, I sometimes feel like one of those people that escaped my normal life. I escaped my childhood, and often that is a great joy and a privilege, and I certainly prefer it to being poor, but sometimes it's an alienating and peculiar experience where you feel like you don't really belong anywhere. All I'm saying at this point is there are deep archetypal and mythic truths present in Squid Game, so I'm not surprised that it became such a cultural phenomenon. My hope is that people will begin to realise, as some of the characters within the game did, that we have to change the entire game, the entire system, if we're going to change anything, rather than hoping that some tumbling trough of dollar will rescue us from penury. If you enjoyed that lovely little bit of frivolous analysis, then please have a look at this video where I talk about other cultural artifacts. And if you want to learn more about spirituality, there's loads of things that I do on my Awakening side channel. Please sign up to my mailing list so we can stay in regular contact. I can tell you what I'm reading, what I'm thinking, talk you through a program that got me free from addiction and can help you too. Most importantly of all, stay free.